I'm Allie, and call me crazy, but I love to root for the underdog. Luke Skywalker, who was just a kid and ended up taking down the forces of darkness, the unknown quiet kid running for student council, or the team that's in last place that no one expects to win. There's just something so exciting about cheering for someone that everyone else underestimates and doesn't think can succeed. I think that's probably because I know how it feels to be the underdog. There have certainly been plenty of times in my life where I have felt underestimated. When I was younger, both of my older brothers were so good at baseball. So I decided that I was gonna try out for softball. And guys, I was terrible, but I practiced really hard, I worked with my brothers, and I ended up making the team. I was always the one who was the least talented in that area, for sure. So I always felt like the underdog when it came to sports and in my family. It was slow pitch softball and I was in the 3rd grade. So they were like, ooh, let's all rotate you and try everything. So pretty much everything. I got to play first base one time, and the first time someone threw it to me, it hit me in the nose and I bled all over the field, and they never let me play first base again. But this week we're starting a 3-week series called Underestimated. That's probably not a word most of us use in our daily vocabulary, but I bet we've all felt the effects of this word in our lives. What does it mean to be underestimated? Well, in the simplest terms, it means to be undervalued, misjudged, or not taken seriously. In other words, it means that we're seen as an underdog. Maybe you have a teacher who sees you as just an average student. You know you're smarter than she gives you credit for, but she continues to underestimate your abilities. Or maybe you have a coach who will not give you a chance to start the big game. You know that if he did, he would see what you're capable of, but for some reason he continues to underestimate you as an athlete. Or maybe you're forced to sit at the kids' table at every holiday. Apparently, your family doesn't think you can eat off the fancy plates or hold your own in conversations about adult things like politics or religion, even though you know you have plenty to bring to the conversation, and you definitely wouldn't break those fancy plates. You're still banished to the kids' table because you guessed it, you're underestimated. I think as middle school students, one of the areas you feel the most underestimated, overlooked, or even looked down upon is your faith. Even though you agree that your faith is important, it seems like a true, growing, and deep faith is something reserved strictly for grown-ups. Think about it. Have you ever been around Christian adults when they're talking about spiritual things? They use fancy words and phrases like sanctified or led by the Spirit or cleansed by the blood. You're probably like, what in the world are they talking about? I go to church, but I don't know any of those fancy words. That must be stuff that only grown-up Christians know. Honestly, I think it's more than just the adult talk that makes you feel like you may not measure up in the area of your faith. Have you ever had any of these thoughts? My friends and I try really hard to be good at church, but it seems like the adults are always calling us out on what we do wrong or how we mess up. They act like we'll never be able to do anything right. Oh, I looked at the light. They act like I'll never be able to do anything right. Or how can I really have a faith of my own when my faith has always been attached to an adult? I believe just because my parents or Sunday school teacher or grandma or youth leader tell me I should believe. I'd never be able to figure this out on my own. Or, what's the hurry? I'm so young, I'll have time to figure this faith thing out when I'm a grown-up. Or, am I old enough to even do anything about my faith? After all, nobody thinks a middle schooler could know much about anything, especially faith, right? Or, I'm not even sure I believe. With all the doubts I have, do I even want to have a faith of my own? Chances are you've had at least one, if not all of these thoughts about faith at one time or another. And honestly, so have I. But I think the problem with thoughts like these is that they're causing us to underestimate ourselves. They lead us to believe that as middle schoolers, having and owning a real faith just isn't possible. And honestly, that just makes me mad. Because if there's one thing I know about middle schoolers, it's that you have everything you need right now to own your faith. You may feel that others underestimate you in this area. You may even underestimate yourselves. But trust me when I tell you that God certainly isn't counting you out when it comes to your faith. No matter if you're new to the Christian faith or just asking questions or have been following Jesus since you were old enough to eat goldfish in the nursery every week, I think we can all agree on this. We've been underestimated. But the good news about that is that we're not the only ones. Years after Jesus walked this earth, a guy named Paul was doing all he could to tell everyone about the way of following Jesus Christ. Paul was a leader in spreading the Christian faith, and because of that, He had a lot of influence over other believers at the time. But sharing the message of Jesus was a huge job, and Paul couldn't do it by himself. So he recruited other people to join his team. One of those people was a guy named Timothy. Paul and Timothy traveled together to share the message of Jesus, and over time, Paul became like a mentor to Timothy. He encouraged and instructed him as a leader both when they were together and when they were apart. Since texting and email weren't quite a thing back then, Paul wrote letters to Timothy to encourage and guide him in his work when they weren't serving together. And in those letters, Paul offered Timothy some words of wisdom on owning and not underestimating his faith. Here's what Paul said. I remember your genuine faith, for you shared the faith that first filled your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and I know that same faith continues strong in you. Paul started by affirming Timothy's genuine faith. Seems like a cool compliment, but what does that really mean? I think it's not always easy to figure out if something is real or fake. In order to identify if something is authentic, you need to look closely and observe. And this is exactly what Paul did to discover Timothy's genuine faith. In this scripture, we read that Paul was affirming Timothy for his honest, true, real, authentic, and certain faith. From everything Paul saw when he was with Timothy and heard about him when he wasn't with Timothy, Paul knew that Timothy had a genuine faith in God. Timothy owned his faith in a real way, and Paul certainly was not underestimating him. What's also cool is that Paul reminded Timothy of the long line of believers he came from. The faith that was modeled for him by his grandma and his mom, Lois and Eunice. First of all, how great are those names? And how great would it be to have a Lois and a Eunice in your life? I don't mean just women with epic names. Epic. Booyah. They're mowing the grass at this time. I don't mean just women with epic names, although that would be incredible. I mean having adults in your life who model a genuine connection with God for you. It's my prayer that each of you would have at least one tangible example of an adult passionately pursuing Jesus in your life. Because just like it made the difference in Timothy's faith, it can make a huge difference in your faith too. But here's what's funny about Timothy. For all the amazing elders and mentors he had believing in him, people like Lois and Eunice and Paul, he had just as many who didn't. Unfortunately for Timothy, not every person in his life was supportive of his faith. Not everyone believed he had what it took to lead and spread the message of Jesus. You see, Paul had put Timothy in charge of a church he had started in Ephesus, and some of the older people in the church there didn't value Timothy's leadership because he was younger. Because of that, Timothy might have been tempted to underestimate his own faith. That's what makes this message from Paul so important. Don't let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set an example for the believers in speech and conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity. Paul knew that Timothy had older people questioning his faith and leadership, but Paul wanted Timothy to understand that he could own his faith in spite of that. No matter how young he might have been, what little experience he might have had, or what other people may have felt about him, Paul reminded Timothy that he had the ability to set an example of faith for everyone. In his words, his actions, his lifestyle, his faith, Paul encouraged Timothy to not underestimate himself, but instead own his faith. And the same is true for you. No matter where you come from, how old you are, how much experience you have, or even what other people say or think about you, don't underestimate your ability to be an example to others in faith. And don't underestimate your ability to have a real, authentic relationship with God. Never underestimate your faith. So instead of underestimating your faith this week, I want you to own it. But what does that look like? First, believe that you are old enough. It's time to stop making excuses and instead make a choice to own your faith. You may not know everything, but you're capable of learning and understanding more than you ever have before. Embrace that the time is now for living a genuine faith, and believe that you're old enough to start growing in your faith. Second, pick an area of your faith to grow this week. Ask God to help you with just one area of growing your faith. Maybe for you that means choosing a good circle of friends, or regularly reading the Bible, monitoring what you watch and listen to, praying for your family, or making church a priority. Whatever it is, identify just one part of your faith that you can grow. Then do it. Take steps with God to grow in that area of your faith this week. Remember, never underestimate your faith. Believe that you are capable of a meaningful, genuine faith that can serve as an example to others. As you head out today, I want you to think about this question. What is one way you feel underestimated when it comes to your faith?